So, we're here on Merrion Square to talk about reproductive health and rights. And just to kind of paint a picture, in the early part of the 1900s, it was a very grim place to be a woman, and particularly a pregnant woman. Obstetricians and gynecologists had to coin a new phrase for Irish women, grand multipars, because the phrase multipars, meaning multiple births, just wasn't enough given the scale of childbirth in Ireland. Grand multipars referred to women who had 12 pregnancies or more. A young obstetrician, Dr. Solomons, who worked in the Rotunda, talks about delivering a baby and finding that there was another infant in the bed, the previous year's baby. So women were just pretty much constantly pregnant. But women who found themselves pregnant outside of wedlock were faced with very stark choices. Many of them ended up in Magdalen laundries and their babies forcibly adopted to Catholic families in England and in America. And as you can imagine, it was a booming time for Ireland's backstreet abortionists. Every large town had a backstreet abortionist who helped women in trouble. One of the most famous of these women was a woman called Mamie Cadden. Mamie Cadden was a woman from a very well-to-do Dublin family. She trained in the UK as a midwife and she owned a lying-in hospital in Rathgar. The lying-in hospital was a place where middle-class women who had an awful lot of money could be waited on hand and foot in the last months of their pregnancies because, God forbid, they do something to strain themselves. But that wasn't Mamie's real business interest. She made a huge amount of money helping out girls in trouble. So the two things that she used to do was she organised an illegal adoption service. So you could go into her hospital, have your baby, and then she would adopt it away and you could pretend that nothing had ever happened. And the other thing that she had a trade in was backstreet abortions. So she would terminate women's pregnancies for a considerable fee. This wasn't any kind of a humanitarian gesture by any means of the imagination. Using means such as inserting laminaria tents, which were a type of seaweed, into the cervix that would expand with moisture, triggering a miscarriage, or by flushing women's uteruses out with Jay's fluid, which is a very caustic type of soap. So these were the kind of things she did. Unfortunately, she was a very kind of a popular figure around Dublin. She drove a sports car, she had amazing blonde hair and had tea in the shellboard. She was kind of at the centre of Dublin Irish high society. And then in the 1940s, things went wrong for Mamie. It's discovered that she wasn't in fact adopting out the babies. In fact, what was happening was she was finding places to dump them. And one of these babies was found in a ditch on the road to Meath. Mamie was sentenced to 8 years in prison and lost her midwifery licence and also her lying-in hospital. When she was released though, she went straight back to her old tricks. She set up a dingy clinic in her flat on Hume Street, which is round the corner here, and continued to offer home remedies for maladies such as venereal diseases, lice, and also continued to offer backstreet abortions. That was until 1958, when a young woman named Helen O'Reilly's body was found dumped on the corner of Hume Street. She died after undergoing a backstreet abortion at the hands of Mamie Cadden. Mamie was the last Irish woman sentenced to hang. Her sentence was commuted, however, to hard labour for the rest of her life, and she later died in a psychiatric hospital. In 1967, following the passage of the 1967 Abortion Act in the UK, the trade in backstreet abortions in Ireland very much died down. Women instead chose to travel abroad rather than take their life in their hands here. But it was still a very dangerous place to be a woman, and access to reproductive health and rights was still very restricted. The 1935 Criminal Amendment Act still banned the sale, display and provision of contraceptives. In 1968, the Pope issued a papal encyclic, Humanae Vitae, condemning all forms of contraception. But contraceptives were legal in the north, and many women who had the means would travel up and down and bring condoms with them. And in 1971, the Irish Women Liberations Movement decided, this is ridiculous. And they decided that they were going to highlight the Irish government's hypocrisy once and for all. And so in May 1971, 50 of them boarded a train to Belfast, gathered up as many contraceptives as they could once they arrived, and brought them back in their suitcases back to Dublin. And they calculated very well. The young customs officers who greeted them at Connolly were mortified by this situation and realised that there was no chance they were going to arrest 50 middle-aged women and go through their suitcases looking for spermicidal jellies and condoms. And just following this, two senators, one of them Senator Mary Robinson, tabled a bill trying to legalise contraception in the Sinead. This document was seen as so dangerous. Not only did it not get a hearing in the Sinead, it was censored. It was so bad we weren't even allowed to read it. And as time progressed, many organisations tried to find a way of getting contraceptives and contraceptive information to Irish women. One of those groups, the IFPA, set up their first offices here in Merrion Square in 1973. They offered contraceptive advice and offered contraceptives like spermicidal jelly and caps in exchange for donations, thereby getting around the law against the sale of contraceptives. In 1978, there was a landmark judgment in Irish reproductive health and rights. It was known as the McGee judgment. A young woman, Mrs. McGee, was coming back into Ireland with spermicidal jelly in her suitcase. It was seized by customs, and she took a case all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that the customs officers had no right to interfere with her right to marital privacy under Article 41 of the Constitution. She won her case, and this triggered legislation, the 1979 Health and Family Planning Act, which was brought in by Charles Haughey's Fianna Fáil government, which was widely believed to legalise contraception for what were described as legitimate family planning purposes. So basically only for married couples. It was a long time, however, though, before there was any real freedom in terms of access to contraceptives. As recently as 1991, the IFPA were fined £500 on Valentine's Day for selling contraceptives in Virgin megastores. Their case was supported by Richard Branson, and the fine was eventually paid by U2, of all people. And it was not until 1998 that all restrictions to the sale of contraceptives were finally lifted. But the McGee judgment, as positive as it was for access to contraceptives, it set a very dangerous tone in Irish life. It was very similar to another judgment, an American judgment, Roe v. Wade, in 1979, which was also a judgment on marital privacy that led to the legalisation of abortion in the US. And right-wing groups in Ireland were very worried. We had just joined the EU, who had told us to do all sorts of dangerous things, like pay women equal rights, equal money, and had told us that really we can't be kicking women out of the public service after they've gotten married. They were telling us all sorts of dangerous things. And they were worried. So they wanted not only a criminal ban on abortion, they wanted a constitutional ban on abortion. And the early 1980s were an incredibly tumultuous time in Irish politics. There was 3 general elections in 18 months. And in the run-up to the 1981 general election, they secured the agreement of the leaders of all 3 of the main political parties, Fine Gael, Fine Gael and the Labour Party under Tlusky, Fitzgerald and Haughey, that they would bring in the pro-life amendment. And the wording that we eventually got was guaranteeing the right to life of the unborn with due regard to the right to life of the mother. And Gareth Fitzgerald looked at this wording and he was worried. He felt it was too unclear. He proposed alternative wording that simply banned the government from introducing any legislation that would allow abortion. But that was thought not to be pro-life enough. So what we ended up with was the 8th Amendment to the Constitution. And there's a brilliant speech by Alan Shatter in the Dáil in the run-up to that referendum that said, "It is only a matter of time before there is a case in which the Supreme Court will have to introduce limited abortion if this wording is put into the Constitution." And he was told no. It will never happen. There will never be such a case. And a young senator, Mary Robinson, said, but this could cause all sorts of problems. You could have an issue where women can't get access to information, or where they won't be allowed to travel. But again, these suggestions were poo-pooed. That will never happen. The amendment passed. And soon afterwards, the pro-life amendment campaign, who had by this stage morphed into SPUC, the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child, began challenging women's right to abortion information. They sought High Court injunctions against groups including the Trinity College Students' Union, open door counselling in the Well Woman Clinic to prevent them from providing abortion information. The case went all the way through the courts, and in what is known as the Hamilton judgment, a ban was placed on any kind of abortion information. And this had really draconian effects. Issues of The Guardian and Marie Claire were impounded in Irish customs. Books referencing abortion were removed from Dublin City Council libraries. And over the years, many groups tried to get the information out as best they could. Campaign groups such as the Dublin Abortion Rights Information Campaign and the Women's Information Network. And they set up a helpline which provided women with abortion information. It was illegal and it operated from many places around Dublin, including the Dublin Resource Co-op. And the way they got the number was 6774900. And they had some very creative ways of getting this phone number out. One was to teach children a chant. 6774900, women have the right to know. And children all over Dublin would be chanting this phone number as a way of getting the information out. The other thing they did in an early form of the photobomb was whenever there was a correspondent reporting very seriously in front of the television, they'd pop up behind him with placards with the phone number on it. So they were getting the information out come hell or high water. And that was the main focus of pro-choice campaigning in Dublin in the early 90s, trying to get this information out. And then in 1992, in the end of February 1992, the thing that we all hoped would never happen, that we were promised would never happen, happened. Pro-choice campaigners got word that a young woman pregnant as a result of rape was being barred from leaving the country by the High Court to prevent her from having an abortion. And so the groups did what any good activist group would do. They decided they were having a protest. But they decided, since this was a controversial topic, they'd start small. So they decided they'd have a protest outside the Dáil, and they thought maybe a few hundred people will turn up. And over 1,000 people turned up. And then they decided, well then we'll have another protest. So they set a protest for Saturday, and they wondered how many people would turn up. 10,000 Irish people took to the streets in support of this young girl, demanding that she be allowed to travel, saying that it is barbaric that in the 20th century that we would force a young girl to carry her rapist child. And the Supreme Court eventually overturned their judgment, guaranteeing the right to an abortion in limited circumstances where a woman's life is in jeopardy. Later on that year, the government sought to remove suicide as grounds for an abortion. And they put that proposition to the people, but it was rejected. They also put two further referenda which guaranteed the right to travel and the right to information, and both of those referenda passed. In 2002, there was a further referendum further seeking to overturn the X case judgment, which again failed. 21 years later, yesterday, the government finally undertook that they would legislate for the X case and allow limited abortion where a woman's life is in jeopardy. Unfortunately, for many women, this is too late, and I think many of us remember that in November we once again heard shocking news that a young woman lost her life in a hospital in Galway, Savita Halapanavar, potentially because we had not legislated to allow abortion where a woman's life is in jeopardy. And here in this square, 16,000 Irish people marched to call for abortion rights. Today there are many groups still fighting for broader abortion rights. The Abortion Rights Campaign, which was recently founded, and Choice Ireland, of which I'm a member. It gives me great pleasure, I suppose, to be able to finish my speech today saying that we finally have our legislation. Things have come a long way, but there's a long way to go. Thank you.